Tonight I want to talk for a few minutes about using waste blocks. In watching a demonstration Saturday, which was fantastic, everybody here? Very nice demonstration. But one thing I noticed was that Stu, when he turned his bowl, used a very large chuck. He used number 3 jaws on his chuck. And that's the same thing that Mike Mahoney did when he was here. And the method that Dan Marino always used was a little different, but got the same results. So I just want to talk about it for a minute. When they used their number 3 jaws, they had their bowl they turned, but they used a tenon on the bowl that they gripped in those number 3 jaws. Well, the grain was running this direction right through that tenon. And the reason they use those number 3 jaws, this grain doesn't have a tremendous amount of strength. It wants to shear. Has anybody ever sheared a tenon off a bowl? Many times. So what I'm going to show you is how to use a waste block that turns that grain in the direction you want to use it. So when I use a waste block, I use a second piece of wood, hardwood, with the grain running in this direction, and glue that to my bowl. And with this particular method, I've turned bowls up to 17 inches on about the same size waste block we're going to demonstrate with tonight, and get very good results. Now, I can't take credit for this. This is a Dan Marino. He came up with this method. And we're going to put this waste block on in such a way that you can easily remove it when you finish your project. Even if you have a very thin bottom in your piece, you don't have to worry about breaking the bottom out. You also can be secure that you can turn it down and stop the lathe with the piece remaining secure and then pop it loose. And to achieve that, I'm going to turn a block here, and I'm going to give a very slight cup to that block. And then I'm going to use some glue in here to bridge the gap. And that's going to be my temporary holding power. So after I'm through turning my piece, I'm going to rely on that to do the holding. But while I'm doing the turning itself, I'm going to chamfer the corners of this off, and I'm going to fill those with glue. So that's going to be my real holding power. So if I draw one a little better here, and this is very exaggerated, but then I'm going to mount this to my flat part of my bowl blank. I'm going to have temporary holding power bridging this gap. My true holding power is going to be by filling in this section with CA glue. Now, the one secret is I don't want to overfill this section. If I glob CA glue in here, it's going to case harden on the outside, and the glue towards the inside will never dry. So I want to be very careful as I fill this gap to just fill it, and then spray that down with my accelerator and dry that glue. So enough talk, let's do something. No, we're going to use CA glue for the whole project. Thick. No, because CA glue has great shear strength. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of tension strength, but it has great shear strength. So when I'm turning the piece, this glue around the outside edge is my real true holding power. When I'm finished with that, I'll turn that little bit of glue away, relying on what's in the center to temporarily hold it on the lathe long enough to get it stopped and what have you without worrying about it coming off. And then by prying against it, it doesn't have much tensile strength and it will break off very easily. Did anybody take a class from Danny and learn this before? One, two, three, four, a few of them, 5. Well, obviously I don't need nearly this much of a block. The other thing I noticed when watching Stu do his piece, it appeared to me that he reverse chucked quite a bit. He was turning one side, he flipped over, and I think he flipped that one piece 4 times if I counted right. The other thing I'm going to achieve by doing this is I'm going to get my work out a little ways from the chuck so I can actually work the back side of the piece and the front side of the piece without reversing it. So then all I have to do is reverse at the very end just to clean up the waste. I'm just parting it off, just getting a piece. This is way too long to use, so I just want a chunk out of it. So we have a large enough tool rest to do the job. So I'm going to pick a piece, I don't know, about 2.5, 3 inches long here. And the first thing I'm going to worry about is how I am going to grip this in the chuck. So I do want that tenon on there. It gives me a tremendous amount more strength to have that tenon than it will to try to grip it in this fashion. There's really nothing to back up where it's gripped now. I was scaring you already, wasn't I? Now I like to have a real square shoulder down there to work with, and at least 1/8 of an inch. I could go a little deeper with this one. Chipping out pretty bad there, but doesn't really matter for this. Now I have a surface I can grip and hold on to. Now the other nice thing about using a block like this wood is dry. It's not going to move. So I can easily take this in and out of the chuck multiple times if I want to once I have my project started. And I know it's always going to go back the same way. But just to ensure that that's going to happen, I'm going to mark the number 1 jaw. So when I do put it back in, I put it in exactly the same way. So if there is any variance in this chuck at all, I'll offset that by putting it in the same way. Absolutely. I'll leave the waste block on, and then every time I come back to it, I'm going to inspect very carefully that glue joint. When I put that glue in there and hit it with the accelerator, it's going to dry fairly clear. If I come back to work on it later and it's opaque or has any air bubbles in it, I'm going to dig that out with a skew or a pocket knife or something and replace that glue. Just going to true up the outside. Stu was very good about not moving the tool rest with the lathes running, wasn't he? I was proud of him. I don't ever do that either. Okay, in reality, I'm very flat right now, so I want to turn about a 1/16 of an inch. I really over-exaggerated here just to give you an idea, but I really only want this gap to be about a 1/16 of an inch. So I can see, I don't know if you can see it, but from overhead, I can see a 1/16 of an inch gap there. So now I'm going to worry about, oh, now you've got it. You can see the gap between my tool and the block. So now I'm going to chamfer the edge. No, it's concave by a 1/16 of an inch. Okay, now I've got a waste block I can work with. And I've marked it in the number 1 jaw, so I know when I put it back in, it's going to be true. So if I have a blank here, and I should have marked the center of my blank already, but first thing I'm going to do before I even mark it, I'm going to clean the surface. This wood's been around for quite some time. It's a little bit dirty. If it were green wood, of course, it would have wax on it. And no matter what, I'm going to go ahead and clean it anyway. And to clean it, I've got a putty knife, and basically I made a cabinet scraper out of it. I've ground an 80-degree angle on it. And I am just going to put it with the grain here. And the idea being, not only is it clean, but I've opened the pores to accept the glue as well. All right. Now I'm going to, where am I at in the camera? Now I'm just going to measure my waste block here, set my compass, and the very center point, I want to dig a nice hole. The whole reason for that, since I'm going to turn this piece front and back while it's on this waste block, when I finally do pull it off the waste block, I'm going to reverse chuck it just to clean up that glued area. When I do that, I want to know exactly where to put this point to know I'm centered, so I don't even have to think about it. So I'm going to make a deep enough hole that I can find that later. And now I'm going to bridge a gap, so I'm going to use my gap filling glue. This is a thick. And I'll put a nice pea-sized drop right in the center. About 2/3 of the way out, I'm going to come just put one nice bead. Okay, do we have it? Oh, there it is. So then I'm going to saturate the waste block with the accelerator because it's going to be pretty confined in there. And then the hardest part is getting it all lined up in the circle. just takes a few seconds to set it there. Okay, now you can see that chamfer. If I do this just right, you can see that little groove that's left around the outside edge that chamfer created. So now I'm going to come back and I'm just going to fill it. I'm not going to overfill it. That's just too hard. Filling the fillet, yes, absolutely. And I'm going to fill it carefully, make sure I don't have any air bubbles in there. This is still thick, yes. And then I'm just going to use the accelerator and hit that as good as the accelerator will let me. Okay. Now I can find my number 1 jaw, my mark I made. Drop it back in there. I'm just going to wiggle it a little bit and feel those teeth drop right back into place. Oh my gosh. 2 whole minutes? That means I got how long to go? Oh. Okay. Now bring that center up close, but I'm not going to touch it yet until I start the lathe up, just to make you nervous. Because I know that point is going to go into the center if it's rotating. If it's stopped at the time, it may go off a little bit due to the grain. And now I'm ready to turn. Now you want to limit the length of this waste block. The further you get away from the chuck, the more leverage there is. So you can't go to extremes, but I definitely have enough room here that I can work on both sides. That's a pretty warped piece of wood, isn't it? And I can do my back cut across here. Or I can cut into it. I can do all my shaping on the back side. I can swing around and do my shaping on the front side. Well, should be able to do my shaping on the front side. And the whole time I know I've got plenty of holding power there and room to work with. And I also know at any time I can remove this. So if I wanted to put a little C8 glue on that piece of bark there so I didn't lose that, I can take it back here to put a drop of C8 glue on it and bring it right back out. And that C8 glue, wonderful stuff. Am I doing good? And I can feel those jaws drop right in, so I know I'm right back in place. And that's even using a different chuck than I used at home, but all the one-ways are pretty close. Matter of fact, you can even go from the talon to the stronghold, and the jaws still drop in. Pretty good, pretty good. I'm not going to use tailstock now, no. So, wow, this is a big tool rest at this point, isn't it? Holy cow, we don't have a smaller tool rest, do we? To do this, all right, we're not doing much with this anyway. In here, and I should inspect it first to make sure that it's all clear. I don't see any air bubbles. It's all, oh, bless you. Let's try to remove that glue. So my goal is to just cut this glue out and leave the center alone. And when I do that, I'm going to take just a little bit of the wood as well so I don't have to turn away that wood with the glue in it later. Doesn't work so good. Now I can lay my parting tool in there, and I'm just going to pry with it. And once I hear that crack, I never turn the lathe back on. And there it is. So now I can reverse chuck. "20 minutes exact?" Oh, that was good. Oh.
Back in '93, when I first started learning to turn, I had bought a set of Craftsman carbon steel or tool steel used tools at a auction, a state auction, and they had been freehand sharpened, and I didn't know anything about sharpening, and I tried to follow what I saw there. And so from there, it was a learning experience until I had the opportunity to go over to John Shackelford's house when Virgil, Pete, and I and John worked on a project for the Art Institute that they refused to take. So anyhow, John had a Wolverine grinding jig system. Ha-ha. So I took my tools over. John showed me how the thing worked, and I ended up buying a Wolverine system. I don't turn often enough that I would have to sharpen tools enough to be proficient at freehand grinding like Stuart tried to teach the class. There'll be a couple of people in there that I think will probably do freehand grinding. The rest of them are going to be like me. They may not turn anything for a month or two, and they've forgotten whatever you tried to teach them about grinding. So there are a couple of jigs that Mike Darlow out of Australia, or New Zealand, Australia, one or the other. He has a book, and in there is this type of jig right here. And it's based upon some type of math, and we'll assume this is an 8-inch wheel, and this is the Wolverine or any platform, and there are 2 pins there. I have copies of this thing laying on the counter at home for y'all to have, but we didn't go home after today's class. So if anybody's really interested in learning how to make these things, let me know and we'll see that you get it. So anyway, as this wheel wears down, these pins keep things aligned, and that bevel does not change on your jig. I set, oh, you can't see that yet. I set this one before the class, and that's how it goes. Same thing as what I'm trying to show here. And when those 2 pins are against that, and you bring the platform up level with that, and this is labeled gouges. That is a 40-degree angle. Mike Mahoney talked about 40-degree angle. Stuart Batty talked about 40-degree angle. Who came up with that, I don't know. But what Mike had to say, I think, is probably the most important feature of the 40-degree angle. That's the way the beaver or the rodent family, when they chew, that's the angle they're chewing at. So that tells me, and should tell you, that's the most efficient angle to cut wood at, because that beaver doesn't want to work any harder than he has to. Okay. The next jig is for a skew. And how you get there is pretty simple. By the way, when you grind a skew, Alan Lacer has determined that 1.5 times the width of the tool, the thickness of it, is the proper bevel. Depending upon the type of wood you're trying to turn with the skew, there's a formula, and I think that Richard Raffin has a little chart that he's put out. The length of the bevel determines the type of wood that you use. Unless you've got gobs of skews, then just grind all of them at the same angle. So we need to know some things. This is a protractor, and that's what we have up here. Draw a line at 70 degrees and your baseline, take the protractor away, and here's what you have. Then you take a bevel square and make the bevel square fit that angle. Okay, and I've already locked that in. And the next thing that I do, and I'm not going to do it on this one, but okay, I have the bevel here and about to the side of the wheel. Draw a line on there, on that side, flip it over, width of the wheel, and draw another line. On mine, then I take this same tool and I take a sharp edge like on a 3-cornered file or a awl or something, and I scratch that line in there permanently. If you're going to grind a wider skew, then you need more lines. And the reason I say that, when you go across here like that, as long as you keep this edge lined up with your lines on the plate here, then this angle is not going to change. And that angle is this 70-degree angle that you want to go after. I measured at one time and it's 37.5 degrees. It might be 39 degrees, but it's close to this, the included angle now. It's close to that 40-degree situation. This job here then is like that. And that'll give you that 37.5 degrees. And I didn't, this guard is a little long, and I needed to trim off part of this so that that fit right and this would go up close. But if we can take that up a little closer. No, we can't. That may be why Ed didn't have the guard on his grinder so he could get it up. If I had this grinder at home, I would take, cut off this part here so this could slide up there. Okay. I want to talk about grinding the skews. As I said here, you would go across there following that line, and that's all you do. And I don't look at this, I look at this. To sharpen the oval skew, Alan Lacer doesn't like the oval skew because it's hard to sharpen. Nick Cook thinks this is the only skew he uses, is the oval skew. And the reason he likes it, it's easy to sharpen. So I called Nick and I said, you know, whatever. And he has a Japanese waterstone that goes like this. He just lays it down like this and doesn't have to worry about rocking on this table. Well, how many of you have an oval skew? You have a problem getting it sharp? Well, if you follow this line and you take, when you on this side here, if you take this finger and stick just a little bit of your flesh under the edge of it, it doesn't rock on you. You turn it over, you do the same thing on this side, put a little bit of that finger in there, and goes back and forth. And what makes this difficult to sharpen is it wants to rock unless you do that. And I figured out how to make a little jig, and one of these days when I get some spare time, I'm going to make a little jig so you don't have to use the finger, and they'll be available. The other skew, and I think you bought some of Richard Graffen's radius skews. Did you, Kent? You didn't? Somebody here I know did. Huh? Frank, did you buy some Raffen? Okay. Okay. When I wanted to get one of them, Danny didn't have one, but he had this particular skew, and I could take it home and profile it. I said, okay. And he says, don't make a radius, just here on the end, because he had called Raffen and talked to him about, because this full radius skew that Raffen was selling is difficult to use. I mean, it's not all that user-friendly. And Richard told him that it was just this little part down here that's important on the radius. And so if you have one of the radius skews, there's something you should do, and you take and make a 90-degree angle, and you can guess at that pretty close on this thing here. Line that up with the center point like so. Lay the skew on there flat at 90 degrees and follow this and run back and forth until that part's flat. The 2/3 part, the upper 2/3 part. Then try to finish the profile. And if you buy a new skew, that's the first thing you do, is you put it on there and you run it across until you got a flat spot clear across that at the angle that you want. Then you start doing the grinding. That's the procedure to properly get a skew to the right, because if you try to take the existing angle that they ship to you and sharpen it this way, it takes a lot longer. Okay? Any questions about sharpening the skew? And I know everybody's going to go run home and use their skew, but I really like it. This skew is one that I just made, and I haven't had time to get rid of a lot of this handle because it doesn't need to be that long. Actually, it'll get in the road when you go to doing things. But it's 1.5 inches wide by 3/8. And I used that other 1.25 inch skew roughing more than I do the roughing gouge. I can rough down with that skew or this skew probably as fast as I can with the roughing gouge, and I've still got the skew in my hand to go ahead and do whatever I want. Stuart doesn't believe in making coves with a skew. Why, I don't know. It's not that difficult. And it's not that difficult with this tool. And that's a matter of personal choice, I guess. Now, I jumped ahead. This little stick here is something that Sornberger gave us down at Campbell. And the way it's used, once you, where's that? Once you set your barrel grind jig, and mine is set approximately right there, and all the grandkids are set right there. It's never going to be changed. They're no longer changing anything back. No, and I didn't bring but anyway, if you stick your deal in there and get your length and lock that down. Using this tool, now this has got to be done with your own grinder. You will adjust this length because this and this may not be exactly the same as my grinder. So once you get the 40-degree angle, yeah, backed up. Let's take this. This is set at 40 degrees. It's not, but let's say that it is. Just run that up there like that until you get a flat spot from top to bottom. And then put your gouge in your deal, set it up here, and look at it real closely. And then lock this down, and that's the distance that needs to be. So you use this tool here, set it in there, and that eliminated another variable. So now when you put this in here, everything's copacetic, and you just start grinding it. And Stuart had a recommendation, I think I'll spring for me anyhow. I don't know if I'll do it for the grandkids, but it probably would be best that you have 2 platforms. And you never, once you set them, you never change them. Because every time you change something, you change just a little bit. And these platforms aren't that expensive, so I think that's probably what we'll end up doing for everybody. And it makes it a lot easier to consistently grind your tools if you sharpen tools as infrequently as I do. And because I don't sharpen very often, or don't turn very often where I'd have to sharpen very often, this is one of Alan Lacer's products that he sells, wherever it's, and it's a diamond hone, and it's probably the best hone on the market, and for the money it better be. When I got this from Alan, he had production turners that had been using this hone for 5 years and hadn't wore it out yet. They're $95 or were. And if you hone your tools, let's stop and look at, this grinder goes up to speed pretty quick. My grinder at home, by the time I turn it on and it's up to speed, I can be through honing and back working. and most of the inexpensive grinders, apparently the 3 new ones that I bought for the grandkids and myself, they're slow to get up to speed, and they're 2-speed grinder. But you can save a lot of grinding time and a lot of tool time if you learn how to hone. And you can hone, oh, I don't know, 3-4 times, maybe 5 times. But once you start to get a long flat edge here, then it's time to go back to the grinder. Any questions? Fine. I don't know. They are fine diamond. You asked that, didn't you? And normally when I get through grinding a gouge, I will take the slipstone hone and hone the inside, because there's a little burr, and it does affect your cut. And if you're going after a final cut, you for sure want to do that. You'll get a nicer, clean cut. And if I'm using the 36 grit, I have a 36 grit wheel on this side, and that ceramic wheel I think is like 100 or something in that. So if you sharpen on this side, I hone it a little bit on all of them, and that gives you a finer cutting edge. Louder. Okay. The question is, do I use the same angle, the 40 degree, on all the gouges? I do now. And I've got a number of these things up on the wall. One of them is for the Irish grind or the Ellsworth grind. One is for the spindle grind. One of them is for the bowl gouge. One, you know. And Mahoney, when he got home, I got to thinking about what he said, and I called him. We had a nice conversation. All of the gouges, and so does Stuart, are ground at 40 degrees. And it gives you the best cut, apparently, and we'll find out this winter when I get a chance to turn. But by grinding everything at the same bevel length or same bevel angle, when it goes to when you go to use the tool, it looks to me like that you've cut down on one of the things how you have to present the tool to the wood. And if you do very much turning, you pick up this tool, it's going to be the same. And I think I will probably do away with my Ellsworth grind on that 1/2-inch bowl gouge. And I'm not going to get into the push and the pull and all that cut. Any other questions? Who's next, Anthony? Where are you at?
Do some basics on spindle turning. I'm not a skew guy, but a gouge guy. I'm going to cut this short and then cut it off. On the off chance that I need 2 pieces. Okay. I think there's this kind of progression. There's about 4 or 5 cuts that you need to know how to make, need to know how to do. I don't think there's any more. And one of the first things you need to be able to do is you need to be able, pardon me, give me a minute here. You need to be able to cut straight. Now the first cut is this planing cut. It's just what I did with the roughing gouge. So it's a nice straight cut. Next one you need is you need to be able to cut 90 degrees straight off at the end. This is the same cut. What we're doing is changing the angle a little bit. Now if you notice, when I get ready to make this cut, I drop my handle way down. Pardon me, you have to drop your handle way down. And you get up close to the wood, but you see I'm not quite touching it. Can we show the overhead? Good. I get up close to the wood, but I'm not quite touching it. And all I'm going to do now is raise the handle. And now I've got something behind the bevel. And I can push. You know, sometimes when you start this straight across cut or a beveled cut like this, first thing that happens when you touch the gouge is it runs. Well, that's what this fulcrum is about. The fulcrum is a real strong, steady cut. Now I've got something behind the bevel, and I can push forward. When I start this cut, I do not move it on the rest. I do not move my tool on the rest. I simply pivot forward and then push. Okay? So we had a straight cut across, change the angle, make the pivot or make a diagonal cut. Here's the other side. I never know what to call this thing. It's not a bead, but it's a thingy, okay? And you do the other side. There's a V cut. This is all done with that fulcrum. It's very strong, very stable. A wedge cut? Okay. A double wedge cut. Okay. Okay? So far, everything has been a very straight line. You start making beads, and you have to go around the corner. Now, you want to point your tool in the direction you're cutting. And since the start of the bead is flat, the top of the bead is not curved. So I'm going to point my tool. And as I go around the corner, my tool comes around. My tool also, are you ready for this? Pivots on its side. As I finish the bead, my handle comes up. So there's three things that have to happen. Your tool goes around the arc, your tool pivots onto the side, and the handle comes up. Now, that's a real complicated thing to think about, right? All three of those motions. The key is you want just below the center of the gouge to remain cutting the whole time. You see, well, you can't really see it. I'm pointing it the same direction the whole time. I make my depth of cut the same all the way around. You need to stay above. Merle? Attaboy. Okay? You don't want the top of the gouge to cut. A lot of people, because they don't want to move this tool as far around as it needs to go, they will actually use this back side, the top of the gouge, to cut. The reason you don't want to use that portion of the gouge is because the metal that touches the rest is to the, in this case, because I'm cutting this side, is to the right. And if I use the left side of the gouge wants to twist into the wood. If it twists into the wood, it goes in deeper, which means it wants to twist in more, which means it goes into the wood deeper, which means it twists. You getting it? It's a positive feedback cycle, and you can't stop it. So what you want to do is just below center. One of the other things I had a lot of difficulty with, I've had this desperate idea that I had to cut fast. And if you ride the bevel, you don't have to. Speed is okay as long as the proper technique is there. The other side, swing my tool out. Same cut. Now, here's the next one. The cove. The cove is actually the exact opposite of the bead. You see, I start on the side, and when I finish, I'm straight ahead. Rolling the tool side? No. It is the exact same as the bead. Every motion that happens, cutting a cove, happens when you cut a bead. They are mirror images. This is, here we are, we're cutting a cove. I just finished, right? I haven't moved my tool. Here we go, back to the cove. Sir? That's true. Yes, it's identical. That's right. Okay. There's one more. Stuart calls it something. What does he call it? The little flat thingy? What? The flat thingy. This is the flat thingy. What? Yeah, that's the flat thingy. Before we get lost here. Juniper. I'm going to do one more thing here. That's really all the cuts there are. There is a planing cut, which is the first thing I did with the roughing gouge, essentially. And then there's that straight across cut. The diagonal cut that we use to make the V-cuts, that's the same as that straight across cut. All I'm doing is changing the angle. The bead, and then the cove. And then this flat thingy. That's a technical term now, flat thingy. I wasn't certain I was going to have the time for this next shot here, but I do. Say it. What's that? That's not a cut now. That's a scrape. This is designed to showcase a tool that I've just recently made. Okay. This is that same cut. Look at that fulcrum. Okay, here it is. Oh, I'll show you later. I broke it. That's all. We've used our time. This, I broke it, but this top that I made, put out for display, is what I was making. The tool I used, oh, I broke the tool. That's why it broke. What? No. The tool is, I don't know how thick that is. I mean, it's a 64th or less, maybe. And what happened was I discovered a problem with it. And just when I was working with it, the bottom of this right here is rough, and I couldn't slide it over the rest. And so the bottom needs to be the same surface all the way across. I had shortened it, and I shortened it from the bottom. So, okay. That's all.